Welcome to video number 3 in the basics of biblical political theology. In this video, I want to look at some of the spheres and the institutions that have been created by God. And we're going to use a chronological timeline of pre-fall and post-fall. And I think that'll be helpful. So we're still in Genesis. So I can't cover what we have already covered so far. Hopefully you've watched videos 1 and 2. But when we start out, we recognize that God has created this realm, this earth, and Psalm I think 24 it is. Yeah, Psalm 24 tells us that the heavens belong to God, but the earth He's given to men, and so we have authority over this earth. And then there are spheres. There's the sphere of self. It's governed by conscience, and there's these rights that come with me as a person. Wherever I go, I have the right to life, and I have the right to carry out the mandates, and I have the right to worship because I have an obligation to do those things. And so wherever I go, I have those rights. And so the individual is the first sphere. There's also the sphere of family. This is pre-fall. Before there's a family, or before there's a fall, there is family. Family has a hierarchical structure. It has a purpose, right? So it's to fill the earth. The family is to worship God together. They're to represent God. They're to carry out the cultural and creation and kingdom dominion mandates. And that's the sphere of the family, with that authority structure with children under the family. That would be pre-fall. And so man has a right to those family components, right? A spouse and children. And also then education. Education is going to be a pre-fall sphere, a realm. Also, you think about culture and the sciences. All of that exists pre-fall, as Adam and Eve would go out and fill the earth, as they would walk through what God depicts in Genesis 3 or Genesis 2 rather, these rivers, and there's gold and there's all these materials. They would go out and they'd understand hydrology, and they'd understand all these different components of creation. They'd look at the garden that God had created, and they would, God gave them a template. Every tree that was beautiful to the eye and pleasing to the eye and good for food. And so they were going to replicate the garden. And so there's all of these sciences, we might call them, and there's arts, and there's culture and education and family and the sphere of self. All of that exists pre-fall. So we would even call these maybe pre-fall institutions or pre-political institutions. Now, when the fall happens, post-fall, there are two new institutions. One is redemptive, and one is retributive. I think that's a word. So I think we know what the redemptive realm is, or the redemptive institution, the redemptive sphere. As a dispensationalist, I say the church began on Pentecost. It wasn't until Christ descended, received the Spirit, and then baptized people into the body that the church exists. Nevertheless, there's always been an assembling of the people of God who've been redeemed. And so going all the way back post-fall, there is going to be a redemptive institution, the people of God, the assembling of the people of God. So there's going to be a redemptive institution, but there's also going to be a retributive institution. Now, here's where things get funky. And let's see how much time's on this video. We're at 3.5 minutes. Okay, so this is where we have to get into a little bit of speculation. And I think this is biblically informed speculation, but this is really, really important. We got to talk about the state, right? So this retributive institution. And the question is, would there have been nations, and would there have been government, and would there have been, the state if we didn't have the fall? And I think the argument is yes, but be careful. It wouldn't have been a retributive institution. Probably what would have happened is that as man spread across the earth, as there was multiple generations, what would have naturally developed was a kind of an organized system of delegating authority to fewer individuals for the good of the whole, to represent the whole, right? So it would be family related, it'd be hierarchical, it'd probably be patriarchal. Here's why I think that argument is not only important, but biblical. Because in Revelation 22, new heavens, new earth, what we find is that there are still nations and there are still kings. And so the idea that there's nations and kings post-glory, would indicate they're not a product of the fall. We don't see them pre-fall, I think because there wasn't enough time. The speculation is that had there been enough time, nations and kings would have naturally developed. And that's why we see them post-glory in Revelation 22. The only difference is at that point, they won't be retributive. So now in our era, we have what would have been, right? We have the state, the civil magistrate, the nation, whatever you want to call it. Its purpose is kind of organizing and representing. There's a representative nature there, so that people can work together as people are spread out and there's a lot of people. Somebody has to kind of organize and provide some structure. That would be the idea. But because of the fall, and because there's going to be human rights that get violated, as we see with Adam and Eve, with Cain and Abel, there's going to be some retribution. And so the state now holds the sword. So post-fall, there are two institutions, right? There's the redemptive and there's the retributive. And that will then lead into my understanding of the role of government in this age. I would take a sphere sovereignty argument. But before we get there, I just want to look very quickly at 1 Peter and Romans 13. I think they're going to help just clarify or demonstrate the biblical validity of the state being these retributive institutions. So we'll look at that just for a moment in the next video, and then we'll move on to sphere sovereignty and contrast that with what really is statism. So hopefully that's helpful. Tune in for the next video.